the CEO of ThreatSpike Labs, Adam Blake.
Thank you very much. Also, for some reason, IHTF always put me on before lunch, so apologies about that. This won't take too long. So last year at IHTF, actually in Barcelona, we presented some slides talking about the kind of threats that we were seeing within hospitality. I myself am always fascinated by hospitality because it's really interesting to see that the threats that we see across our global customer base usually affect hospitality before any other industries. So before we dive in, I just wanted to walk you through like a quick overview about who we are. So I'm the CEO of ThreatSpike. ThreatSpike is a cybersecurity company. So we are located in 6 places in the world. We have around about 400 customers. We process around about 40 billion events per day. Probably our biggest industry that we cover is hospitality. So we work with all the big brands, we work with management companies, we work with different franchises, and we get a really fantastic insight in exactly what's happening because our software covers the email side of things. So we monitor lots of emails, we look at what's happening on the endpoints, we monitor web traffic, and collectively this gives us a really good insight into what hoteliers are facing. So what I wanted to kind of talk through is kind of some of the stuff that we've been seeing this quarter. And it continues to get more and more interesting from my perspective as to what the hospitality industry faces. So some of the stuff that we've seen this year is up here. And I'm going to just walk through each one of these cases separately. Just kind of give you a bit of an insight into how these attacks materialize, what kind of impact they have, and we'll go through some of the kind of mitigations and remediations that you can actually take if you guys are facing these. So if we kick off, so the first one we wanted to talk about is Revenate. So Revenate is one of the largest direct booking platforms within the hospitality industry. And they actually suffered quite a sizable breach, much like the Booking.com one, where their customers started actually receiving phishing emails, and these phishing emails were impersonating their platform, just like the same kind of thing that we saw with the Booking.com, where it was making it look like it was coming from Revenate. But actually, when you clicked on the link, it would take you to a completely different site, and people would put in their username and passwords, and obviously their accounts would be compromised. Now, what was quite interesting about this is that these phishing attempts, they successfully compromised a number of these different accounts. Now, Revenate itself doesn't actually have any way to export the booking information, so the attackers actually went through the pages within the platform one by one, taking screenshots or saving the pages, and essentially taking the information out of the system that way. And so what was kind of also interesting is that this all happened last year. So actually, it was only until January this year where customers started, the actual end customers, the people staying in the hotels, actually started to themselves receive phishing emails, which were asking them to make payments. So it was a bit of a surprise that all of a sudden, come early January, all these different hotels were getting complaints from their customers saying that they were receiving these phishing emails. Obviously, a number of people did put their credit card details in, and fraud was committed. And when Revenate were put on the spot to talk about this, they then came back with this response, which actually they pointed out that this actually happened in November last year. So they hadn't actually told their customers, but they were aware of the issue. And what they did is they mandated two-factor authentication on the Revenate platform back in November last year. And that was in response to the fact that they knew that this had actually taken place, but they never told anybody. So come all these phishing emails being sent to the end clients, they then started coming out with these kind of pre-canned responses. What was also really disappointing is that on Revenate's website, it says that they are SOC 2, as well as many other things, but they couldn't provide any more than 30 days of access logs. So because the actual attack happened in November, there was literally no information at all about whose accounts were compromised, where they got logged in from. And so the whole thing, I think, was a bit of a catastrophe on their part. And it's interesting that they hadn't really learned from the whole Booking.com saga in how they should handle and respond to these types of incidents. So in terms of like these, I don't want to just kind of point out all the things that are bad. It'd be really good to kind of step through some of the things that we would recommend you do. So one of the key things to do here is to try to integrate these platforms with single sign-on. So like the Okta and Azure and things like that. Now, a number of them, these vendors like push back and they resist these kind of things. I think as an industry, it's really important to lobby them into actually providing these sorts of integrations. And obviously, as well, multi-factor authentication, whilst it was optional on the platform, really everybody should be using multi-factor. It's kind of, it's key nowadays. It's just too easy to get compromised if you're not using it. And it's important as well to try to take logs in from these platforms. So often these platforms will provide information about who's logging in, where they're logging in from, and you should be taking these into your internal monitoring tools and looking for suspicious activity, just like you would if it was your own email accounts, for example. So the next really interesting thing, now this started again last year and has again played a really big part. I'm sure most of you will have seen this one, these fake captures. So what's been happening recently is that users either have been receiving links or they've kind of stumbled upon compromised websites when they're Googling for things. And these websites are springing up these captures where it actually asks them to prove that they are human. And in order to prove that they're human, they have to go and they have to do like Windows R and then Windows paste. And what essentially is happening here is that the browser itself in the JavaScript has the ability to put anything it wants onto the clipboard. So what it does is it puts PowerShell and other types of script commands onto the clipboard. It then tells the user that they need to prove that they're actually not a robot, but they're actually a human by pasting this in and making it run on their machine. And the users do it. They do it time and time again. And so the whole flow looks like this. So an email will turn up. The email will obviously like kind of have a, the normal kind of narrative, I've got lost, I need help, or I left a review or something like this. And it drives the user to a website. Now, interestingly, most of these websites are hosted on Cloudflare and they're protected by actual real captures. So these real captures are there so that automated scanning tools can't see the actual content of the site. So before the user accesses them, the scanning tools can't review the content of the site. So they put you through a real capture. And then when you go through the real capture, you get to the fake capture, and the fake capture looks like a legitimate capture to the end user. They go ahead, they run the commands, and they open up this Windows run dialog, and they just paste it in and they execute it on their machine. And interestingly, because this is not coming in as like, say, an executable that downloaded, it bypasses a lot of the application whitelisting, it bypasses web filtering, it bypasses EDR. And it's not until like later in the execution flow that some of the EDR tools actually kind of pick it up and detect it. So it's a really novel approach to this. And so here you can actually see one of these attacks. So this is from our platform. You can see the activity here. We already had detections in place for these types of things. We monitor all the clipboard activity for anything that's sensitive or potentially malicious that's happening. And so you can see the full kind of execution flow. As the person pastes it in, it goes off, it executes, it tries to download things, and the machine in this case got sandboxed. And the attack was stopped. And so now there's a lot more detections built into kind of all the antiviruses and things like this. So they're kind of now kind of catching up and they're able to do a better job of stopping it. But the attacks are still going on even to this week. In terms of like the checklist for here, one of the really important things to do is to block script interpreters. So this is things like MSHTA, this is like PowerShell, command, like anything really. If the user doesn't need it, and typically the users in hospitality environments, like talking about the front desk, we're talking about F&B and things like this, these people don't need access to these features. So they should be disabled. And at the same time, they probably also don't need run dialog as well. It's quite an advanced feature, which most users won't need. And so you can actually disable this through GPO. And again, we allow all this kind of stuff to be blocked through like a kind of, very easy to set up service on our side. And importantly, everybody should be running EDR nowadays. You just can't get by with a traditional antivirus. EDR solutions, they monitor all the activity on the machine. They look for suspicious activity, then they're able to actually block it or isolate the host so it doesn't cause any more damage to the environment. So one of the things last year that I talked about was we were starting to see emails which were actually you could kind of tell that they were somewhat AI generated. So there would be kind of like a structure to it. So there would be the beginning, in the middle there'd be a bit of an AI generated part, and then at the end it would just be kind of a standard blurb in it. And so it's interesting that just a year later, unexpectedly, we're actually now starting to see full AI generated emails. And so you can see this massive blurb of text here. This is all generated by AI. And so in these cases, it's actually talking about the fact that there's a complaint about the staff performance. It usually orients around nowadays around complaints about the staff or the hotel or the food or something like this. And this drives people to want to actually click on the links to see the reviews. And so about halfway down through this email, you can actually see that link. And that link takes you through to a phishing site or again to the fake capture. And there are tools actually online like ZeroGPT where you can take text. It might be interesting to just take people's emails and chuck them in here to find out if actually it was completely crafted using AI. And so these are really kind of interesting outputs. And so here we can see 100% of this email was generated by GPT. And so it is kind of interesting though, because in that case, I think it's the next case here, some of these emails are really confusing in what the person is even complaining about. And so whilst it's AI generated, the people who are using the tools are not doing a particularly good job of using the tools. And it starts to kind of get a bit confusing as to whether there's a complaint about the guest, a complaint against the hotel. It's interesting to see that they're still kind of making mistakes as they do this. But a lot of these emails, these are kind of ones that I think this is just from February or March. You can see that it kind of follows the same kind of pattern in it. And there's no copyright. There's not very much for email protection solutions to kind of to latch onto in order to work out if it's legitimate or not. These come from all different types of accounts. Often they come from Gmail accounts, and it's just a piece of text which anybody could have written. You, me, or potentially somebody phishing the hotel, which is making it really hard, I think, for the email solutions to actually kind of discern what is real versus what is not real. And some of the ones that we saw last year, they kind of get into a dialogue. So they're not going for anything on the first email. They're just trying to engage. And then if somebody replies back, then it becomes a multi-stage process where actually they get an automatic response. And that's when they try to get phished. Booking.com continues to generate a lot of phishing emails. There's still a lot of attacks trying to target users of Booking.com. And so you get, again, the kind of traditional types of Booking.com emails. So it's interesting to see that they're just using the same kind of approaches still as they were using in the past couple of years. And so here we can see kind of a typical type of email that's coming through. And again, here you can actually see the copyright on here. So it's quite easy to block this stuff because it's not coming from the right email address, but it has a copyright for Booking.com. So this kind of stuff is very, very easy to block. But they are getting quite creative. And so here, in a bit of an interesting twist, they kind of send an email, which weirdly talks about a bit of a system update and client booking, but it's only two lines. And then they put the whole email as a PDF and as an attachment inside the actual inside the email. So then obviously the end user kind of goes through and they open up the attachment, and inside is actually what looks like an actual email, because you can see the from and the subject and stuff like this. So it's genuinely quite interesting to see what lengths people will go to try to evade the email filtering solutions. And one really interesting one that we came across, and this was a little bit of a mystery. We got asked to help a company in Dubai from an incident response perspective. So they were struggling with the fact that their customers were receiving these messages through Booking.com through the application. So they'd have the Booking.com application, and within the application, it would look like these messages are coming from the hotels, just the same way that we saw before when all the Booking.com accounts were being compromised and people were logging in and sending these messages. Except in this case, they hadn't compromised the account. So it really kind of begged the question, how were they able to send messages through Booking.com if they haven't actually compromised the account? And it's quite obvious from here, but they haven't compromised the account because you can see in some of these examples, they're splitting up. You can see the booked world booked hotel space dot world. And the thing is that that's because booking.com introduced link protection. So they're looking for those links going through the emails, and they'll actually block the links. So like the messages. So they'll block the links. And this is a setting within the booking.com interface. You can go in there and you can turn it on, you can turn it off. But the thing is that they haven't been able to bypass it. They have essentially just kind of split the URLs up, and they're asking the end user to put it back together when they put it into their browser. So if they'd compromised booking.com and the account, then they would have just turned this feature off, but they haven't. So it did really take quite a bit of investigation to work out how they were doing this. And this is probably like people a little bit more familiar with this than I was, or our team at the time. But booking.com give you, like every single customer, they will give the hotel a unique email address to contact them on. And that unique email address will essentially, if you email it, it will put the message into the booking.com application. And it wasn't actually that the booking.com was compromised. It was that this CRM that this company was using was actually produced by their sister company. So they had actually made their own CRM, which they were selling to other people, and it had no two-factor authentication, and it itself had been compromised. And what they were doing is they were taking out all the email addresses, and they were then emailing those email addresses, and it was appearing on the booking.com app. So it was fascinating. I mean, it's quite interesting. And when you've suffered that kind of breach, it's very difficult to claw that back. Now they've got that unique email address. There's no revocation process. They can email at any time. It's a bit of a small disaster. So again, on this case, it's another example where two-factor authentication would have been really, really important. And again, logging. When we went to ask them about the logging, they showed us the logs, and I think the logs had stopped like a year before or something because the database had filled up. And so, some of this stuff it gets quite bad. One interesting one as well, which we saw, this is quite a novel one, novel in the way that it's being used, is search hijacking. So when you actually go and you put into Google, or in this case, I think this, so Google, you put in like the hotel name. And so if you're searching for a particular brand, be it Radisson or something like that, what was actually happening here is that they had all the normal stuff, so the website was appearing, the bit of the site was appearing to make a booking. But above that, the attackers were taking sponsored adverts on the search engine in order to steer the visitors off to a website. Now, interestingly, this was not being used to phish them per se. This was just being used for plain old scamming, I would say. And what it was is that it's this like reservation center. It has a very poor reputation. And what they're doing is they're kind of reselling the hotel rooms, and they're putting their own markup on top, like a few, €100 or such. And so this one is quite interesting because, again, this attack could easily be used in a different way. So they might just take out adverts and, again, steer people off to, fake login pages or malware sites and things like that. So in terms of things that you can do about this, there isn't a huge amount, obviously, but you can just kind of make regular searches on the search engines, just make sure that what you expect your guests to be seeing, they're actually seeing, and there's nobody else that's kind of impeding that access for them. And again, you can sign up to reputation websites. These reputation protection websites, they'll actually do a lot of this stuff for you. So they'll keep on constantly searching, and they'll just look for clone websites and things like that. Another interesting one. So this is quite an interesting one. So this one, you can see here that the person has received a voicemail message. Now, in this fake voicemail message, they then actually say, look, here's the link to access the voicemail. But the thing is that they're not just giving a normal link. They're putting the link in with what's called URL encoding. And so the URL encoding changes things like a /, it will change it to like a percentage, 2E or 2F, or whatever it is. And ultimately, this is something where the Outlook client is not recognizing it as a link. And so what they say is copy and paste this link into your browser. So what happens is that the user obviously takes the link, they copy it into the browser. You can see at the top. And so they've copied this. Looker Studio is a Google product. and they paste it in, and the browser recognizes that, yeah, okay, this is an encoded link, and then so it decodes it, and it takes you to the actual correct website. And so it's, in this case, it's another launch pad to a bad website. So what they do is they use OneDrive, they use Google Drive, they use all kinds of different websites like Looker Studio in order to kind of stage the attack. So they'll direct users to a good website, which just hosts a link to a bad website. And lastly, on this list of things, we talked about last year about remote access clients being used a lot in attacks. So there's this concept of living on the land, right? So as an attacker, if you bring some malware or something like this into an environment, there's a lot of risk that you're going to trigger the detections and you're going to get caught. So what they really love to do is they love to bring absolutely nothing at all. And they like to leverage the things that exist on these systems already. And so one of these perfectly good examples of that is remote access clients. So things like TeamViewer, AnyDesk, remote support that's built into Windows. And so they will call up the reception, or they'll send an email or something like this, and they'll ask them to go and install a remote access client so that IT can then go and actually access the machine. And so once this is installed, and once that end user has given the details on how to access this system, the problem is that this person will come along maybe then, maybe in tonight or whenever, they'll access the system, and obviously they will then get access to anything which that user has access to as well. And one really interesting one that we saw, it's always interesting when you see this in real world attacks, is that there was a hotel, again, in Dubai, and it had a generic user, and this generic user, they had AnyDesk installed on only like 6 machines out of the entire company, and nobody knew where this AnyDesk had come from. It'd been there for years. And then all of a sudden, somebody logged in through this AnyDesk client, and the first thing that they saw was the Opera hospitality browser, right, where the F&B user, or whoever, this is fake username, but the actual user had stored their password in the browser. And so it was amazing to see that within a minute, what they did is they just kind of dumped the password out of the browser. And to do this is simple, right? You just open up Developer Tools, you go to the Network tab, you hit Submit, and you can actually see the username and password that's being posted onto that website. And so they took it out, and they had the Opera password. You can just go off, and they can just take that and do it from their own machine, right? They don't even need to be in your network anymore. So they could be accessing your CRM right now from outside the network. So you think, oh, 2-factor is going to save me here, right? And it's good to have 2-factor, it really is. But the thing about 2-factor is that it allows, it's part of the authentication process, right? So when you log into a CRM like Opera, what happens is that you present your username, you present your password, okay? You authenticate using 2FA. Now, you don't have to do this every time you refresh the page, right? And that's because you get a cookie. And the cookie stores your unique token, which the site can use to identify you. So all they do is they just take the cookie out of the browser and paste it into their own browser, and then they log in as you. So this stuff is, again, is really difficult to fully protect against. But in terms of this, you should be looking at blocking remote access tools. That one is really important. That is a game changer for malware, for ransomware attacks. You should be monitoring, again, the application logs, right? Do you monitor the Opera logs? Do you monitor no-cross logs? I mean, it's at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of monitoring that goes into Azure and Office 365. You get all these risky login alerts and stuff like this, but do you get any risky login notifications for Opera? And the other thing is that you should stop users from storing their passwords in browsers, right? So they should be using password vaults and things like that. So yeah, hopefully this was useful. Just a little bit of information about us. We've got a stand upstairs. So if you wanted to talk about any of this kind of stuff and how we can help you with that, or you just want to have a sounding board for how you can prevent these types of attacks, then just let us know. So there's a couple of questions. Do you have any stats or insights on the volume of hacking attacks on hospitality businesses versus other industries? Not off the top of my head, I wouldn't say. But I can tell you this, that hospitality is one of the first industries that we see targeted, right? So we actually protect airports, we protect Taylor Swift's private jet company, you know, there's all kinds of people they protect, right? And so it's interesting because the hospitality ones are the first people to be targeted, okay? And there are a number of reasons for this. One of the key reasons is that I used to work as a consultant, right? So as an example, if I received an email from some random person, I would not reply. That would be weird, okay? But in hospitality, we, kind of get used to the fact that the emails are going to come all the time from Gmail accounts, and they can even come from GMX accounts and stuff like this. And you can't really tell like a legitimate customer from a non-legitimate customer. And so there's a lot more engagement. Obviously, we teach, the hotel staff to be very nice, very pleasant, and it makes it a very safe environment for attackers to come. It's a lot of attack surface. And ultimately, the budget within hospitality doesn't match the kind of budgets that you would see in some of these other industries like financial services. So, but one interesting statistic that always sticks with me is that on our email protection, we see how many emails get quarantined for different customers, right? So we have a customer in the UK who is a retailer, and they have about 6% of their emails quarantined, okay? And then we have some US hotel management companies, and in some cases, 45 or 50% of their emails are being quarantined. It just kind of goes to show just how much bad stuff people receive every day, And some of the stories are just crazy in terms of the lengths that people will go to. They will not hesitate to call them up, night managers and people like this, and again, try to extend the attacks. So no, off the top of my head, I don't have any, but I can tell you that it's a lot worse within hospitality than some of the other industries, yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Hang on, Adam. I'm not letting you off that easy. I've got a question over here. To your left.
Oh, yes. Hey.
Yeah, me. Just on that, you sort of mentioned there, sort of staff and how they're taught to be very friendly, very sort of welcoming, very sort of, oh, let's help you with your problem. On a very basic level, how well do you think the industry does at training staff on cyber threats?
I think the industry generally does. It varies a lot between companies. I think as part of the PCI thing, there's this bit where you're supposed to provide, there's packages you can get, right? And it provides like the ASB scanning, it provides the self-certification, like the SAQ support and stuff like this. And it also includes training for the end users, right? So the training is usually there. There is some sort of training for people who work in hotels. But you've got a few problems. One is the turnover of staff, right? They turn over sometimes, people turn over all the time. That's a lot of training to put people through, right? If you're doing quarterly training and stuff like this, then it's just not going to be enough. It needs to be kind of very regular training. And I think one of the biggest problems with training is that some of the training that's being provided is from like the 1990s. You look at some of this training and you're like, how to recognize a phishing email, and it's like, when you get it on your dial-up internet, you just think, well, okay, yeah. So I don't understand at the moment why nobody's providing threat intelligence-led training, right? So when the Booking.com attacks were happening, why did the training not say, look at the URL and see if it goes to Booking.com or not? There was no training, right? So it's kind of, there's only so far that you can take it with users, and the training needs to get a lot more specific. But definitely a lot of people doing the training. I think sometimes it's like, as my American friends like to say, it's a bit of pencil whipping on some of this stuff, and it would be a lot better. It could be a lot better. And I think that, to be honest, you need to equip people with the right level of training. It just can't be like that kind of process of, okay, this is how you would threat model it. This is how you would work out if this is a bad guy. It needs to be a set of rule of thumbs that you can just quickly look at and say, look, this is something that would indicate. And a lot of people like to blame the end users at the end of the day, but it's on the vendors as well. So it's a bit of a kind of a match between the two, where we all need to be doing a better job of it.
Well, thanks, Adam. Any final questions for Adam?
Up here. Should we work on the industry on the basis that probably, despite our best efforts, we're going to be hacked? And then the question is, why is it so often? We could talk about Sabre a few years ago, I could talk about Marriott, I could go on and on. Why is it that there isn't the level of transparency in reference? You used the Revenate example. So what should a hotel do? I think, is it more about the process and how quickly they resolve the issue, and then how they communicate to their guests, because clearly it seems to me most hotel chains and vendors have been hacked really don't want to tell anyone how it happened and why, but more importantly, what have we done to make sure it doesn't happen again?
I would say that no, to be honest. I would not say that you should assume that you're going to get breached. I know that was a message that was pushed a number of years back, but actually, we swapped the slides out at the last minute. There was this other set of slides I was going to go through. It's really salesy, right? But it talks about the fact that actually our customers are not getting hacked, right? We've actually seen that one of the key differences between what we do and what other people do is that our philosophy is that if you give people the technology and you keep on supporting them and you don't keep charging them more money for new features and iterations and you work hand in hand, then actually people will get better. And I have to say that there's some people in this room who are our customers, and I am extremely proud of them. You know, having been on that journey with them and seeing what they've managed to achieve, people can achieve amazing things, right? Even to the point where some of our customers have a monetary penalty on GMs if they're not enforcing those security controls at their hotels, right? If you do all the right things, if you, in the Revenate example, if you applied two-factor, okay, if you were monitoring the logs and things like this, you might argue that, is that really my job? You know, on the monitoring logs, shouldn't they do that? It's arguable. But if you are doing the things that you need to do, if you are blocking remote access tools, if you're dumping the VPN stuff, right, and replacing it with other solutions, because that's a really common entry point, if you're applying multi-factor, if you've got EDR on your endpoints, you're probably not actually going to get hacked at the end of the day, right? There's a lot of things that you can actually do. And so I don't accept that as an answer. And I think that, you know, looking across, again, our hospitality customers, whilst they're targeted more, they're not getting breached more, right? That's not a case. So it's a case of just doing the right things. And also, you mentioned about not telling people. That one is really interesting. There's a lot more regulation coming in Europe, which says that you need to be telling, okay? You need to be, Europe is definitely getting a lot harder on regulation. DORA, which is now applying to the financial services, is different, obviously, to hospitality, but hospitality companies are falling under NIS and stuff, right? NIS 2, you know, it's their DORA is requesting that people tell about breaches within 4 hours. So it's coming down. It's really like that. But a lot of the American side is not quite as, you know, and so a lot of these vendors are American, so they're not really, you know, declaring it as quickly as they should do. So I think the Revenate one's a perfect example of where the vendor could have done a lot better. But there needs to be a lot more pressure, I think, from the hospitality industry collectively to say, look, you know, to Booking.com, people like Revenate, look, you know, we need the SSO integration, right? We're just going to stop. You know, it's hard, right? But collectively, it's possible.
We've got one more for you there. Just come in, Adam.
How pen testing are impacting on the investments in security for any type of industry and company. So the pen testing is really interesting. A lot of companies are now starting to do pen testing, the offensive security side. So, right, you put all these controls in place, but how well are they actually working? Pen testing is amazing for actually trying to understand how effective those controls are at stopping different types of attacks. And so the point is that why go off and waste money on investing in security in different things which you think are an issue? Why not prove what's the issue? And I think the pen testing is really helping that. It's actually helping open the eyes, especially things like red teams. So the difference between a pen test and a red team is pen testing is kind of, it's just like, oh, here's my IP addresses. Go scan my IP addresses, or you've got some missing headers and weak SSL ciphers and things like this. It's incredibly boring stuff. Red team exercises are more about, okay, let's try to phish the hotels, right? Let's try to see, picking up the phone. Let's try to email people. Let's see if the malware controls work on the machines. Let's see if we can hack their VPN. Let's try all these different things and then paint a picture of how a hotel or a company might actually be hacked. And then you take those issues and then you implement controls to stop those attacks from happening, right? So you're actually then applying your budget for the maximum impact. So it makes a big difference applying the pen testing side. And you just got to make sure that you feed that back in to that process of the budgeting. All right. Thank you very much.